Hello, I'm the Theorizer, and I want to warn you very simply that this will possibly be the most insane concept I have ever conceived. All I wanted to do was figure out how the mask works in the Jim Carrey film, and I ended up biting off more than I could chew. It's so unimaginably insane that I will have to make a string of extremely sane videos to cool down from it. I'm not sure how short this video will be because I'm not sure where exactly to go with this, and I don't know how I can possibly present this in any way other than with a completely normal demeanor, as anything more will risk my reputation as a functional human being. This is going to be brief, and it's more or less just a bizarre little thing I want to highlight to get the conversation going. I can't really stall any more than I have up until this point, so let me explain why I think Eddie Murphy is the real dad of the Son of the Mask baby, because this is wearing me down, and I have no idea how to solve this particular problem. I have spent a month and a half thinking it through, and the amount of time that I have to spend easing you into this cannot be understated. Let's begin. So, The Mask was a 90s comic series that got adapted into the famous Jim Carrey film, which is quite funny. It's basically about a guy who finds a mask in a chest underwater, and when he wears it at night, it sort of unleashes his innermost self and turns his life around. He becomes the life of every party, and he gains supernatural slapstick ability on par with most reality warpers. At the end of the film, he ditches the mask and it floats away down a river. I'm sure many of you don't know this, but a sequel was made years later where we discover more about the mask and where it floated to. It floated to a nearby city where a comic book writer finds it, and also goes on some less funny but similar nightclub adventures. This is where the story takes a turn though, because he wears the mask as he conceives a child with his wife, and this leads to the birth of a supernatural child with horrific slapstick abilities. The film mostly centers around his dog wearing the mask and facing off against the baby in a sort of Looney Tunes insanity. The mask is revealed to be an instrument of destruction belonging to the Norse god Loki, who comes to Earth so he can retrieve it and return to Asgard with Odin. The mask's powers are basically derived from godly mischief. Now, I'm not sure how much comic lore can aid here, or even if it's relevant to the canon I'm about to enter, but here's where things take a truly bizarre turn, and I don't quite know how to cope with this. First of all, the sequel, Son of the Mask, is nothing like the original movie. It's much less funny and yet somehow more kid-friendly while also being more grotesque. It's hard to explain unless you've seen both. There's a scene that is often omitted from the film which is so particularly grotesque and bizarre that many rightfully don't know of its existence. Basically, we see the conception take place. Yes, in a kid's film. No joke. Right there. I genuinely fear, for my presently monetized life at the moment, the fact that this was somehow made is actually beyond what I am capable of understanding. There are things like the TV show All Hail King Julian, which is completely insane but still has some inkling of being for kids. Then there are things like the Cat in the Hat movie, which is beyond my understanding as to how it got made, considering how inappropriate it is. Then there's this. The fact that animators had to animate this keeps me up at night. Who was a part of this? How can anyone do this and still claim to be a human being? How can you dedicate any time to anything like this and not immediately object and quit your job? This is so far beyond my understanding that I'm going to physically implode. This is not for the weak-willed or the faint-hearted. Where I'm about to go is not a place you should follow, but I'm gonna go ahead and do it anyways. And this might be the last time I'm capable of such a thing. I can't dance around this for a second more. One of the models of the, is structured from Eddie Murphy's face. Yes, Eddie Murphy, a man who has literally nothing to do with these movies. But it gets even worse, because I do believe it's the Eddie Murphy one that makes it first. So, what do I do with this knowledge? You might say, just ignore this, it's irrelevant to the plot and the greater lore of this universe. You might say, oh, just forget it. But there's a problem here. I would discard this if it weren't for a single key factor. It's that there's another model, and it's based on something that instantly has lore implications. Because that model is Jim Carrey himself. This is interesting because if we can somehow figure this out, we can infer how the mask works and where the comic lore diverges from the film lore. The fact that the creators thought of this at all is important to note. The fact that it was even an idea that was remotely considered is quite relevant. Again, I'd be inclined to say, hey, it's fine, they just used his face to model a crazy scene, but it's not just Eddie Murphy. This is where I broke down crying, of course, because now we have an extraordinarily disturbing pattern. Jim Carrey was the previous mask. Not only that, but when you look at the concept art, which is where the birth of this idea resides, you can see more details that are crucial. Both of the faces are mask-shaped. It's not just the actors, it's the mask versions of the actors. They literally made these, they drew these, they photoshopped these. But Eddie Murphy was never in a mask film. Or was he? Jim Carrey's is the second model, and Eddie Murphy's is the first. This means there was a previous wearer of the mask, the one who buried it in a chest underwater beneath the bridge. A Scandinavian mask doesn't just appear in America one day. Basically what I'm saying is that we not only get insight into the Eddie Murphy mask prequel that was never made, but we also get insight into how the mask parasitically absorbs pieces of its victims' souls and imbues them into its own identity. But it cherry-picks protagonists for comic efficiency. It's all in the fact that they not only put this much thought into it, but that they had the gall to choose the mask's own Jim Carrey here, in his mask form, along with Eddie Murphy in a previously unseen mask form. And the fact that Carrey is second, it all comes together and hands down the most disturbing find I have ever made. Before we use this amazing yet horrific detail to prove everything about the Mask's universe, we need to contemplate the ramifications of this scene on the future, because that's just my point. If it is Eddie Murphy's model that beat out the rest here, then it means the baby itself is, in some spiritual way, the child of Eddie Murphy's personality's parasitic imprint on the Mask's history tab. In terms of the lore solutions, at first, my cardinal goal was to find the missing mask film with Eddie Murphy. My first instinct, based on Ben Stein's speech about the masks we wear, reminded me a little of some of the elements of Shrek's Thesis, another green entity who happens to be best friends with Eddie Murphy slapstick in a location presumably far closer to Scandinavia. Yes, that Son of the Mask was actually a non-canon backdoor sequel to Shrek, which is far less insane sounding than it would have been 5 minutes ago, but obviously still insane, and definitely not something I can make work here. In fact, there doesn't seem to be really any Eddie Murphy film that Son of the Mask could be nodding to here as a prequel, but if you know of one that could fit as a mere inspired reference, or a film where something is buried in a chest underwater, do tell. For now, let's just assume the most logical thing in this illogical situation, which is that there is a zeroth mask film, one that takes place before Jim Carrey's escapade. Again, this is more provable based on the fact that Jim Carrey was the second model and Eddie Murphy was the first. There was a third model too, but I don't believe it was based on anyone's face, as it sort of functioned as a placeholder for the most recent mask wearer, which is Jamie Kennedy's character. Alright, so a hypothetical Eddie Murphy character was the original human who found and lived with the mask for some period of time, and then ended his time with it by placing it in a subaquatic chest for Stanley Ipkiss to find. Both his and Stanley's spiritual material were partially leached away by the mask, and this is seen in manifestations, such as the horrific omitted scene from Son of the Mask that I still can't move past. So I need to know, is there anything in either Mask film or any Eddie Murphy movie that can possibly give credence to any of this? If so, please tell me, because I know that something very weird is going on here, but I simply can't fathom this for a second longer. This was just a little minor theory attempting to use an insane clue to solve the history of the mask and who its previous wearer most likely could have been. But if you have anything else to help me solve this little movie universe, do comment, preferably something far less disturbing than a reproductive history tab, but I am genuinely intrigued by the supernatural elements of these films, so it'll be interesting to see if I can dig up even more. That's all this is, really. With that said, I still need to unwind from this. Maybe I'll make a few videos on normal content. Maybe. Until then, I'm the Theorizer. The insane part is I spent a month and a half on this and this is all I could find. What is wrong with me?